This is In the Loop. I'm Cody LeGros. Thank you for joining us. We'll turn our attention to the biggest sporting event in the world. To do that, I'm handing things over to the guy who's usually in the driver's seat for this show, Christian Bryant.
Sunday marked the start of the 2022 FIFA Men's World Cup. FIFA expects the month-long international soccer competition to draw billions of viewers. This year's tournament is being held in the Middle Eastern country of Qatar. The selection came as a surprise when it was first announced in 2010.
Qatar!
Considering the country was much smaller than competing bidders. In 2015, the US Department of Justice indicted 9 FIFA officials in a widespread bribery scandal. 2020 court filings saw the DOJ allege that Qatar's representatives paid millions in bribes in exchange for officials supporting Qatar's bid. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter, himself ousted for his role in that related bribery scandal, said just a few weeks before this year's World Cup that awarding it to Qatar was, quote, a mistake. Even after FIFA awarded Qatar the World Cup, the Gulf country came under even more scrutiny for how it has prepared to host. The use of foreign and migrant workers to build the stadiums has been described by Amnesty International as forced labor, including false exaggeration of salaries, withholding of pay, and workers often stuck in debt after having to pay hefty fees to recruiters. With authoritarian regimes in the global spotlight for hosting the world's biggest sporting events, we were wondering, what's in it for them? And why are international sports organizations comfortable having their biggest events hosted in these countries? Well, we've got some answers for you in the latest edition of our In the Loop series, Scoreboard. Let's start with a bit on how international sports has become a big platform for authoritarian governments. Not that many democracies want to take on the burdens that can come with hosting marquee events like the Olympics or the World Cup. Local support for bids has declined, as voters don't want to put up with the costs of updating infrastructure for the games, years of construction, and having hundreds of thousands of people come into town. Scrutiny for practices in host countries of major sporting events has been a running theme in 2022. China hosted the Winter Olympics this past February in Beijing, while also facing diplomatic boycotts by leaders of several countries, including the US, over human rights abuses of Uyghur prisoners. Beijing's selection as host of the 2022 Winter Olympics came after they were one of just 2 bids, competing against Almaty, Kazakhstan. When the IOC awarded Los Angeles the 2028 Summer Olympics, they didn't bother asking for any other bids.
Countries that have a more participatory approach or a democratic society, they are not seeing actually the benefits of hosting those mega sporting events. So I think sports governing bodies are really at an inflection point. Either they change, or the only countries that will bid to host these events will be countries with grave human rights violations.
Andrea Florence also points people to the documents that govern entities like the IOC and FIFA. The IOC commits to protecting human rights in the first article of their code of ethics, but in an effort to stay politically neutral, they generally haven't been too afraid of hosting events in countries with repressive human rights records. In the past 15 years, nearly half of the Winter and Summer Olympics have been held in which 2 countries? You know? Russia or China. But earlier this year, the IOC approved a strategic framework on human rights. Recognizing some of the issues at hand, it included a provision aiming to increase scrutiny of the human rights records in places bidding to host Olympic events.
The International Olympic Committee finally accepted that it is falling under the UN guiding principles and that it has responsibilities under human rights. Without human rights responsibilities, without human rights recognition, it's not possible to have a world of sports that is actually a force for good.
This could mean that authoritarian countries will face more scrutiny before bidding. But even with these standards in place, the benefits of turning to authoritarian countries can still be mutual. Countries get to improve their reputation, and sports organizations get to make a ton of money when authoritarian regimes offer to step in. These partnerships with big sports brands are part of an influencing strategy that critics and foreign policy experts have dubbed sportswashing. The idea is that if you're a country looking to improve your reputation, you can do it by leveraging the love people have for existing sports. It's a chance to bring sports closer to your country's people and make it a point of unity. But you can also make millions of sports viewers aware of your country in a positive way. It's one thing for a government looking to leverage a non-profit governing body like FIFA or the IOC. For privately run sports leagues like the English Premier League, Formula One Racing, UFC, and others that don't have charters requiring them to respect human rights, there's even less of an issue.
When you look at it just from a business perspective, from a capitalist perspective, it becomes malpractice for you not to accept these offers when they're available to you. Because I've never read a business book. When I studied business, I never read any business book that taught me that morals go above, your bottom line.
Kareem Zidane has spent nearly a decade writing about the involvement of authoritarian regimes like Russia and Saudi Arabia in the international sports world. He says Saudi Arabia in particular has developed a version of sports washing that is more drastic than anything the sports world has ever seen.
It starts with Vision 2030. It's this concept that Mohammed bin Salman came up with to deter Saudi's investments in oil and its dependence on oil. So what did they want to do instead? They wanted to invest significantly in sports and entertainment as a way to employ their people, obviously as a way to distract and present Saudi Arabia as this reformed society.
If Saudi can host or sponsor a sport, they will. Formula One? The Saudis host a race, and the state oil company Aramco sponsors a team and the entire championship. Soccer? They've poured in $2.3 billion to sponsor clubs just in the first 8 months of this year, and they own the English Premier League team, Newcastle United. Pro wrestling? You can argue how much of a sport it is, but the Saudis will absolutely pay WWE about $100 million annually for the company to host 2 events there each year. Earlier in November, ahead of one of their Saudi events, WWE executives Stephanie McMahon and Paul Triple H Levesque presented a championship belt for an advisor to pass along to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
We have a gift for His Excellency because the highest honor in WWE is to be a WWE champion. And no one is a bigger champion for WWE and the kingdom than His Excellency.
أنا كنت أبغى أخذها في الحلبة.
Wanted to take it on the arena, not here on the press conference.
Look, I get it. When I was a kid, I also wanted Triple H to give me his championship belt, but there's gotta be a cheaper way to do this, MBS. Whether it's WWE, soccer, esports, or any of the other sports the Saudis have tried investing in, there's a method to the madness here.
When you are obsessed and loyal to your sports team, and then say Saudi Arabia goes and buys your sports team and promises to invest in it and make it one of the most successful teams ever, well then Saudi has successfully managed to purchase a whole legion of fans for free.
But fans and athletes aren't always as welcoming. When the Saudis funded the creation of Live Golf to rival the existing PGA Tour, there was such a big backlash that the DOJ has gotten involved, and both tours have sued each other. Tiger Woods accused the Live signees of turning their backs on the PGA.
I still don't see how that's in the best interest of the game. What the European Tour and what the PGA Tour stands for and what they've done.
And families of victims of the September 11th attacks protested outside Live Golf events in the US. 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi citizens, as was Osama bin Laden. The league still has won over some fans by signing away star golfers, including Phil Mickelson. And setting up golf leagues or hosting World Cups can be a proxy for countries to settle their geopolitical rivalries. In 2017, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt severed ties with Qatar, alleging it was funding terrorism and becoming too close with Iran. They tried to get FIFA to strip Qatar of hosting the 2022 World Cup, but FIFA held firm. And in 2021, with Qatar's World Cup looming, the countries agreed to settle their differences and restore ties with Qatar.
This is Qatar showing its political strength, getting back into the arena, the global arena here. And unless something horrific happens at this year's World Cup, which I'm not necessarily predicting will happen, we will have to consider this a success for Qatar. Despite all the media, despite everything that's gone on, all the reporting on the migrant abuse, Qatar still got what it wanted in the end and is now even on stronger footing than ever before.
So as world sports fans are turning their eyes to Qatar, how is FIFA dealing with it? How should fans understand it? Joining us now is someone who can help us understand how what happens on the pitch has consequences for what happens off it. Joshua Robinson is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and the author of the new book, Messi versus Ronaldo: One Rivalry, Two Goats, and the Era That Remade the World's Game. He covers European sports and has focused on some of the off-field scandals relating to this year's World Cup. He'll be covering the tournament from on the ground in Qatar as it unfolds. Joshua, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
How is this World Cup going to be different from most of the other World Cups in recent memory? I'm understanding that there are a few different things that are a little unusual about this year's World Cup.
Yeah, there are two big ones. The first one that everyone who's ever watched the World Cup will notice is that it's November. This is normally a summer tournament, but Qatar is a country in the middle of a desert, and it's over 110 degrees in the summer, so that made it completely impossible to play in the summer. And the other thing that is much stranger for people who will be on the ground is that the World Cup has never been held in a country this small. The past two were in Russia and Brazil. Before that was South Africa, and before that was Germany.
Amnesty International has documented the working conditions for building the stadiums and facilities being used. To what extent has some of this scrutiny led to reform of Qatar's labor practices?
Well, this has been the major issue around the World Cup for the past decade. The treatment of migrant workers, the exact numbers of how many workers have died or been injured on construction sites are disputed, but human rights organizations agree that they are certainly in the hundreds, perhaps in the thousands. Qatar's organizers contend that it's closer to about 37. But they have been very, very strict in their definition of what constitutes a work-related incident. Now, some of the most exploitative practices that Qatar and other states in the Gulf used for their large construction projects have been ended. The kafala system, which was a system of sponsorship for migrant workers that allowed employers to have almost total control over the laborers, including holding their passports, has ended. But conditions are still extremely difficult.
The U.S. team recently added a rainbow to its crest, but it seems like the soccer community has protested this Qatar World Cup for years. How have fans reshaped how the soccer community sees this event, and what protests could we see from players and others during the World Cup?
Qatar is a conservative Muslim country and has a ban on homosexuality. It's illegal. And so one of the big issues going into the tournament was how LGBTQ fans would be welcomed and whether they'd be welcomed at all into the country. So different teams have taken different approaches. 9 European teams or so have said that their captains will wear a captain's armband featuring the words "One Love" on it with a rainbow design. The U.S. national team, as you mentioned, unveiled a crest where the red stripes are replaced by rainbow stripes, but they won't be wearing that crest in games. A couple of nations have gone much further. The Netherlands has released some very forceful statements calling for compensation for the families of migrant workers. And Denmark has maybe taken the most visible stand. They'll be wearing black jerseys instead of their traditional red as a sign of mourning for the migrant workers who've been killed.
Joshua Robinson is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks so much for your time, my man.
My pleasure. Anytime.